Hello YouTube, this is your boy Mike coming at you again with another YouTube video, and today's topic is going to be why is the dating market in the United States different than the dating market overseas? And there's several reasons for this, and when I say the U.S., really meant to say in the Western world in general, whether you're in Canada, the UK, or Switzerland, any first world country, dating there versus, let's say, dating overseas, which Thailand, the Philippines, but in this case I'm also going to include countries such as Brazil, Colombia, even though that technically isn't overseas. But so anyway, to get into this, several reasons for this. First off, cultural. In the United States, in many Western countries as well, we have lots and lots of money. So versus in other countries, they tend to come from poorer backgrounds. So in many cases, to compensate for the lack of funds, they kind of, in a sense, invest in one another. Versus in the States, we tend to invest in ourselves. We use our money to, indulge in consumer, and buying things and things that kind of serve our own needs. Versus other countries, since there everyone doesn't have as much money, they learn to kind of be more of a community and work together, barter for things, and to also work together to pay expenses. A lot of times you will find that families, you'll be one house and pretty much the whole family is there. Even as they get older as adults, you'll see the grandmother, the grandfather, and the children there with their families as well, and their grandchildren, and they'll all live in one house, pay off the house, and kind of function that way as a unit. So in general, whenever one of the people in the house is having an issue, maybe they need clothes for their children, then of course, that person's brother, sister, or grandmother will kind of chip in for the funds they have. So in a sense, they kind of work as a unit there. So you have that going on. And so in many cases, people, because they don't have as much money, they try to be resourceful and they try to build networks. So a lot of times people go out, they meet their neighbors, they know their neighbors, they know a lot of people in town. When they go to clubs, they know the people at the clubs. So this way, by networking, what they lack in money, they can kind of make up for, through like the hookup, through the, by knowing this person, and I know a person that knows a person. That way they can kind of survive and get by. So in many cases, they it's to their benefit to be very social. And so when you come in there as a foreigner, it's very natural for them to want to start a conversation with you, learn more about you. And of course, since you come from a richer country, you automatically bring in more resources. So that being said, you'll find that conversations tend to start up very naturally versus in the U.S. Not that it's hard in the U.S. to necessarily start off conversations with people and that kind of thing, but you'll notice that in many cases, you need some type of icebreaker in the West, as far as, we could be talking about sports or we could be talking about work or that kind of thing. And it's somewhat awkward just to meet random people on the street and start a conversation with them. Although I've seen plenty of people, especially like pickup artists and that kind of thing, start conversations with people in the street, and even just more extroverts and that kind of thing. But what you will notice, though, is that in these countries in particular, all the time when people see you're a foreigner, they automatically want to start a conversation with you and get to know you. So it works very well when you're trying to meet, women, because they'll be very intrigued and they want to know more about your background. And since a lot of them don't necessarily have the funds to travel, they want to know more about your country. And so it's very easy to break the ice with them and start conversations. So that being said, it's it's easier to find a connection with the women in those countries versus in the U.S., where everyone is kind of to themselves, somewhat like in a bubble. In many cases, if they're not, in the U.S., if they're not vetted by, if a girl sees you, she kind of wants to vet you by her friends. If her friends don't really approve, then, some cases she doesn't want to deal with you. Versus in some of these other countries, you can still be somewhat of a normal guy. And again, for the most part, as long as you can bring some type of security, you're doing well for yourself. You can provide for her, and that kind of thing. For the most part, you'll do quite well even amongst her friends. So they, like, as I said before, they tend to be very friendly. Now, I know that I'm speaking with a broad brush. I'm not to say that there aren't rude or unfriendly people in these other countries, because they are. But I would just say, just from personal experience, I would say percentage wise, they tend to be a little bit more friendlier than in the United States, only because, as I said before, mainly because what they lack in money and funding, they make up through networking. So a lot of times people there want to be more social and network to get things done and to know people in town and that kind of thing. So you have that factor working for you. Also, keep in mind that in a lot of these countries, some of them in particular, the ratio of man to woman is off. You may find out in some countries that there are more women than there are men. A lot of times, like I said before, some of these men are off to war. Some of these, by the time you get to like mid-20s, 30s, that kind of thing, some of the men have either, traveled to another country for work. Some of them have died off through maybe gang activity or some type of criminal activity. Some might be in jail. Some may have even passed away from, various different things. But either way, within a certain, age range, you'll start to figure out that things tend to be in your favor, especially in, I believe I'm going to say maybe Norway. I think they actually looked at it and saw there actually were more women there that actually were men. The only thing about that country is the women there tend to be a little bit taller. So, so you have that. But either way, the other issue you gotta consider is even in countries where maybe the ratio is about the same, keep in mind that a lot of these people there, tend to be unemployed. And so in many cases, a lot of women there, and women in general, they generally are looking for someone that could kind of take care of them, provide security. And so in many of these countries, the men barely in some cases have enough to provide for themselves, much so a family. So in that case, a lot of men are kind of off the table for some of these women to even date. So that leaves an opening for you as a foreigner to kind of come in and kind of, to date some of the women, because they look at you as, as a good catch. Not to say this, they have, in almost every country, you're going to see men there that are, lawyers, doctors, that kind of thing. So they have men that are doing well. But because a lot of these countries tend to be poverty stricken, there's going to be a lot of men that not necessarily, they don't necessarily make enough to to pretty much afford a family. And in many cases, a lot of the women, they don't necessarily want to kind of, marry these kind of men, because it's going to be very hard for them to survive and have a family. And also, in addition to that, also keep in mind that since these countries are poor, they don't have necessarily the programs that we have in the United States, such as we have, WIC, we have like the, housing department to help you find housing. We have food stamps. We have like the secondhand shops. We have like, several charities. But in other countries, they don't necessarily have these programs. So in many cases, it's kind of dog eat dog. And a lot of times, people are just scraping to get by. They have to, as I said, for the most part, live with their family. You'll see lots and lots of homeless people. And that being said, in the United States, where we have all these programs, those programs in a sense kind of replace the masculine energy that a lot of men would bring to a relationship. Because if a woman doesn't really need you for housing, she doesn't need you for food, she doesn't need you, to provide for her children, because she'll have WIC. And then in many cases, she can also, for whatever reason, she doesn't want to be with you anymore, she can put you on child support. So in that case, the woman technically, in many cases, doesn't really need you. So in that case, you're going to notice that in the West, the women tend to be a little bit more, what's the word, like domineering and so-called independent and that kind of thing, versus the other countries. They really, really value that masculine energy, because they really need somebody that can provide for them. And you also got to take into account, because some people would say, well, technically the woman can still just, find some type of job there and kind of make ends meet and that kind of thing. The other thing you got to consider is that because in these countries, they tend to be a little bit poor. The police are somewhat corrupt. A lot of times, a lot of the organized criminals there work with the police and that kind of thing. So even though a woman could technically somewhat provide for herself, but then you got to ask yourself who's going to protect her, who's going to keep her from being robbed, who's going to make sure she comes home safe. There's lots of trafficking in some of these countries. There's lots of robberies and lots of, I hate to say it, rapes and that kind of thing. And in many cases, a lot of these cases go unsolved, especially in places like El Salvador, where there's like femicide going on. They really don't. Sometimes here and there they actually find, like female bodies. And so in that case, I only bring up to say that women also, besides just your money, she'll also value your male presence, because you obviously you just being there will deter several men from trying to harm her or sexually assault her and that kind of thing. So the women there really, really depend and really enjoy and really appreciate that masculine energy, because not only can you bring financial protection and security, but you also can bring them physical security as well. So that being said, all these factors kind of work in your favor when you're dating overseas. And in many cases, as long as you're a guy that's pretty much stable, you got a decent job, you can provide for yourself and maybe a family, you'll do extremely well overseas. I would say, percentage wise, even better than you would in the States. Because also you got to consider in the States that a large percent of the women are obese, and a lot of men won't date obese women. So that takes a lot of women off the table. So as a result, the pool of women is even smaller. And then on top of that, with all these programs, as I said before, the women can be extra picky because they don't necessarily need a man besides maybe, for sexual reasons, entertainment, that kind of thing. And plus, and as a result of this, you have, so many men simping for women on Instagram. Women, they can easily open up their app. They can see men all across the country. So that being said, in many cases, whatever you can get in the States, I would say, for the most part, you can do a whole lot better than that if you're willing to travel overseas. So if you're dating, let's say like 4s, 5s, and 6s in the States, you definitely can probably get 7, 9, 8s. That kind of thing. You definitely will go up in tier as far as the type of women that they'll necessarily be attracted to you. And the thing about it is, the women in these top tiers, you'll find out that they're very, very feminine. Unlike in the States, I would say as the woman goes up in her tier, she becomes a little bit more demanding, snootier, and I just feel like the amount of stress and energy you put into trying to win over some of these women in the States is kind of in vain, because you're not really getting back a return on your investment. Versus, some women overseas, as BGS has explained, you'll find a woman who lives literally in a shack. She lives in a shack with a guy who probably does like similar to like Uber Eats. And she'll cook for that man. She'll be submissive to that man. She'll give that man children. And she'll live out that man for the next, 20, 30 years without any issues. Versus in the state, even though you might be making over 100K, some women are now saying that that's not even enough. And then even then, when you marry that woman, right after you put a ring on her, she can completely just change her mind. She can just, let herself go. She has no real incentive to kind of, stay in shape, and, because now she's at this point, she pretty much has you, she has you, especially if she has a child by you, at this point, you're kind of, I'm not gonna say at her mercy, but she has extreme amount of leverage on you. So in my opinion, it works better. Not to say that you can't find a good woman in the States. There are some good women that are very feminine and traditional. I've seen many of their videos, but what I am saying is, percentage wise, overseas is a whole lot better. And overall, that is really without these points I've just explained, as far as, the cultural, the view of men, how men are viewed versus in the West versus in these other countries, also what men bring to the table, how, men in general are viewed, and also like each, the West views men a certain way and what you can bring to the table, versus overseas, men are viewed a certain way. And I just feel like, so to sum it up, because I don't want to keep this video going, very long. These are some of the main differences between dating in the West versus dating in overseas, and also in parts of South America, such as Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, and that kind of thing. So just tell me what you think in the comment section. If you agree with me, if you can think of any more differences, please subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, hit the like button on my channel. And until next time, this is your boy Mike, aka Traditional Woman Lover, signing off. Thank you. Bye.